You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions. Welcome, everybody, to the Rock Art Podcast. This is Chris Webster, and if you're hearing my voice, that means we don't have a guest today. I'm the guest, and we're going to talk about another one of our panel deconstructions. And in order to set that up, though, we're first going to bring up a book that Alan has put together, and it's called The Iconicity of the Uto-Aztecans. So, Alan, why don't you tell us all about that book and also where people can find it?
Well, it's got this whole journey, this intellectual journey, as I might call it, has an amazing backstory. I've been visiting the Coso range and its rock art for over 50 years. And that's the area of California, Eastern California, southwest corner of the Great Basin, that has the greatest concentration of rock drawings in the entire Western Hemisphere. It's about 200,000 images in about a 10 by 10 area, 10 mile by 10 mile area. And it's mostly all conveyed on the base or a small little privately owned element. So it's all protected.
Yeah.
So I've been either conducting tours or visiting one of the major canyons in that area for, again, about 50 years. And going back maybe 4 years or 5 years ago, I discovered a panel, a rock art panel sitting in Little Petroglyph Canyon. It's a small triangular boulder that I hadn't seen before. Duh. You can chime in and tell the general public why I might not have seen it before.
I mean, I've been to Little Petroglyph Canyon, as you know. You took me there and the rest of our crew when we were working there. And I'll tell you what, it is so overwhelming because of the tens of thousands of panels and individual motifs and glyphs and everything that it's easy to miss something. And honestly, the way that the water goes through there in certain times of the year and, heat and freeze and thaw and things like that, rocks could break apart and something could roll down the hillside or something like that. And you could go back year after year and probably see something new that somebody squeezed up in and did some, created some images that were hard to see from just walking through the canyon. And then, some other day it might be visible because it's fallen apart and now it's easier to get to. But also you could just miss stuff. There's so much.
And I have to tell you that the environmental influences have a huge effect on the ability to see the glyphs. I've been there after a rainstorm. You can't see nothing. The rocks just pick up water and most of the glyphs are invisible, which is amazing. Or if there's total sunlight, completely cloudless sky, again, you can't see nothing. A lot of the glyphs are not good. But if it's cast over by clouds and you have glancing light, it somehow brings out the glyphs. You've seen that, haven't you?
Yeah, for sure. And that's common, I would say, with this type of rock, this volcanic rock, this basalt. I've seen that. It's the same way at Petroglyph National Park in New Mexico. The first time we went there, we were just driving through and went there in the middle of the day and could hardly see anything and went back in like early evening. And we're like, where'd all these petroglyphs come from? Because you just couldn't see them.
The Indians say that, the supernatural elements in some of the California Indian groups, they talk about the rock babies that live inside the rock that they can hear crying. And from time to time, they'll produce more art. And the things you didn't see before, you now see again. It's like they've added new elements. So you have this triangle boulder that stands about waist high. And on it, there are 5 what we call anthropomorphs. They're, animal, human, or humanoid figures. And they look like they're holding up parachutes above their heads. And I go, what the hell is that? And there's one of them that has a crescent moon and kind of a sun-like orb below it. And this smaller individual has a snake in one hand and a wand in the other. And I go, damn. And it's a singular panel. And in Little Pet and the Cosos in general, you get this incredible conflation. That's an interesting word, layered images over images. And it's overwhelming. You sometimes can't deconstruct the nature of what you're looking at. But here, I call these narrative panels because they are distinctive elements that are singular. There's no over painting or overdrawing. So,
right.
But it was just confusing. I go, what the hell is that all about? And I had some thoughts about it. And so it turns out I've got to lead you in another direction for a moment, and then I'll come back to this and you'll understand why. Mm-hmm. Carolyn Boyd is a rather well-known and famous archaeologist, also has an extensive background in art and art history. And she works with one of the most prominent research centers for rock art in all of the United States. It's called Shumla. And in South Texas, near the border, over by the Pecos River and the Rio Grande and all that stuff, there is an incredible array of rock art. These are paintings, pictographic murals that are covering that whole area. And she produced a book after doing 10 years of research on one of those panels. And the book was called The White Shaman Mural. And it was, back in 2016, it was ruled as one of the best new books in archaeology, given awards from the Society for American Archaeology.
Wow.
And I went, it's a rock art book. It got an incredible award, you know, and I'm supposed to be Mr. Rock Art. I need to get that book. So it was expensive. But one of my patrons bought it for me, and I got it in the mail, $60. And I looked at it, and I know I'm an oddball when it comes to doing some of this stuff, a bit eccentric. But the first thing I do is I look at the bibliography, right? I look at the references cited. And damn, about 2/3 of them were all in Spanish. And I go, how the hell am I going to understand any of this when I can't even get the primary research? Haven't read any of it. And it's all in Spanish. So then I opened the book and I looked at it and I tried to read it and I said, I can't follow this. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And I'm just being very honest and transparent. And I said, well, the only way I'm probably going to get to this and understand it is to go piece by piece. If you want to eat the elephant, you don't want to choke yourself or die, you eat it in small bits. So I went to the back of the index and I took it word by word and went to the narrative and then read what they had to say about that particular word. And it took me at least 2 years to go through the book.
Wow.
And I did. It's all got notes on the side of it and, you know, it's falling apart and I've used it so often. But I finally figured out what the hell it was talking about. It had to do with a deconstruction of this mural and an argument that what we are looking at was a key creation narrative, a sacred narrative creation story, which is characteristic or still known for the Huichol and the Nahua or Aztec people.
Okay.
And that particular story is an interesting one, and I'll get to the details of it, but it's called the fifth sun, or creating the sun. That's what the story is all about. And it is one of the key singular narratives that fuel the religious metaphor for both the Huichol people and the Nahua. The Huichol are known because they're both of those cultures in certain aspects have some of the most ancient and well-preserved documentation regarding their religious theology. The Huichol are the ones that take this very long trek and go out to a sacred mountain and acquire peyote and talk about the nature of what they're doing. And they also produce those remarkable paintings and tapestries that incorporate their religious theology and the elements of it. Those multicolored, amazing paintings and tapestries that you can buy, and their shamans, their medicine persons, are the ones that would probably be doing that, or men or women. But they paint in color or put in a tapestry the key figures that are part of their religion, and also show the relationship of those figures visually. Okay?
Okay.
So fast forward back to that discovery that I made in Little Petroglyph Canyon. So what I found, and I know this is crazy, I always say I've lived sort of a bit of a supernatural life where sort of the cosmos seems to direct my steps and, focus on what happens to me as how would you put this? I call it a sorpresa milagro, which is Spanish for a surprise miracle. And they happen to me all the time. I'm a very eccentric fellow, and I don't know why, but some divine, creature is helping me to steer my way around this interesting adventure we call life. So the story that White Shaman book tells is that there is a lunar goddess, right, who is a key figure in all this. And the lunar goddess, in the time before time, goes on a journey leading the 5 primordial pilgrims to a sacred mountain where they're trying to create the sun. So this is a time of darkness, and the lunar goddess is a moon goddess.
Right.
And she creates the light that allows them to go through the the territory to this sacred mountain. And then they have a fire that they create, and then one of the pilgrims has to commit what they call auto-sacrifice, where they would jump into the fire and essentially die to create the sun. As it goes, the 5 pilgrims are not so inclined to do that.
You don't say.
Yeah, they're not. They are a little reticent, I don't know about creating this sun and jumping into this fire and dying. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing at this point. But so 4 of them decline, but the one that was the youngest and sort of the most, how would you put this, imperfect in many ways, decides, I have the courage, I'm going to do this. So the imperfect one jumps into the fire and goes through a lot of, adventures in that particular exercise, but then creates the sun. And the sun is going to usher in a new chapter in the evolution of the culture and bring in the people. People are going to be created, supernaturally. But there's a problem, as there should be in these kind of stories. And the problem is that after all this tumult, all this craziness, the sun has been created, but it won't stay up in the sky. It keeps bouncing along and either burning up everything that's on the terrestrial Earth or being too far away and everything's freezing. So it's either burning up or freezing. So then all these primordial pilgrims, all these people that were on this journey, decide to get together, and they're going to hold up the sky. So they're put at the 4 corners of the earth and in the center, because the number 5 is critically important to these cultures as a pentagram. That's a 5-part exercise, and there are 5 pilgrims. So this is 5 is the magic number. We can talk about that. But what they do is they push up the heavens and then the sun is correctly anchored and can now go through its evolution or its cycle that we know it does on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So going back and looking at that rock art panel, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're doing.
Okay.
You've got the lunar goddess, right? Anyways, let's continue that. I think we'll go in the next section, right?
Yeah, let's talk about it on the other side of the break. We've linked this into the show notes. So click in if you're listening on podcast player like Apple Podcasts or anything else. Click into the show link and it will take you to the APN page where you can download this. I saved it as a PDF so you can download it and follow along with us as we deconstruct this panel. And we'll continue doing that on the other side of the break. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the Rock Art Podcast, episode 166. And this is Chris Webster helping Alan out with describing this panel. And so you just set up this whole situation where we're going to talk about this panel. And first off, going back to the legend and the history that you talked about, and then we have this panel right here. Is this one of a few or even only examples of this particular situation, or are there many examples of this? And this is a common thing that these people would have sketched onto the rocks?
That's a very poignant and pointed question. And that was one that the co-author of that book you alluded to had for me and said, is this a one-off? I thought that the Cosos is all about bighorn sheep. Why is,
right.
What the hell is this thing doing there and how does that relate? So I had that same unction, if that's a word, same kind of tug about this. And then I found other narrative panels that have a similar or nearly identical set of imagery, or at least in part picks up picks up the singular elements, some of the key figures and themes and individual characters that occur in that panel or that are described by those that understand this in that same way. Okay. So remember I alluded to the book I had to read about the white shaman mural. Well, I figured it out. I read it. I talked about it. I thought about it. I took notes on it. And don't you know that the white shaman mural has the same story as the one I'm telling you in that panel?
Nice.
In other words, they are depicting this singular creation narrative that parallels or is an analog of what I'm telling you.
Okay.
It's got the lunar goddess, it's got the 5 primordial pilgrims, etc., and is a parallel of the Huichol creation story and the Aztec/Nahua story. Now, jumping back, what happened here was I mentioned all of this and this revolutionary understanding to my colleague, who you've heard on this podcast several times. He's one of the most popular guest scholars.
Tirtha.
Talking about Tirtha Mukhopadhyay. Buy me a vowel, please.
Right.
Yeah, I finally figured out how to spell his name properly after, working with him for probably a decade. But Tirtha began to understand what I was talking about, because I didn't barely understand it myself. And he decided that for his professional basis, in other words, he works as a professor at Guanajuato University, and if he was to get tenure, he had to write a very significant book that had to be published by a top-tier publisher, one of the ones that were configured as the most prestigious in the world. Yeah. And so he said, Alan, there's something going on here that I can use as a platform to jump off and write this book. Will you help me? I said, well, sure. That's a great adventure. So then we worked together to write the 70,000-word book published by Bergen. And it's got on the cover one of the images of snakes that occur on the famous Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. in Mexico City.
Okay.
So there's that one.
Nice.
And the theme and focus and subject matter of that book is snakes.
Yeah.
And snakes seem to be a central or indexical animal, and you'll remember I've used that before, something that is caught in the minds of a particular linguistic element. It's called the Uto-Aztecans, which is one of the largest groups of native people throughout the world. They're in California, they're in the Great Basin, they're in Mexico, both even into Central America. There's probably, hundreds of thousands of people who spoke or even currently speak Uto-Aztecan or Nahua. The Maya speak Nahua, etc. It's Nahuatl.
Okay.
Anyways, one thing went to the next, and I assisted in the creation of the book and began to help him weave his way through a story about how the snake served as sort of a archetype that appears in many different forms, not only rock art, but textiles and codices, which are printed matter for the Aztecs and other groups. And then also their basketry and their textiles, etc., etc. They're always full of snakes. And why the heck would someone or some group through thousands and thousands of years be so hyper-focused on snakes?
Yeah.
In America and in the Western theology, snakes are bad guys, right?
Sure.
They're associated in the Christian theology with sin and death. And I have to say the Nahua people and even the Huichol and others also saw the death metaphor associated with snakes. But to them, death is only the opposite of life. And life and death are two sides of the same coin. They are perceived as just part of the cycle, the universal cycle of the cosmos. And they don't think about it in the same way we do. It's not it's not an end, but a beginning. And the beginning of a new life. I know that this sounds like Christian when we talk about resurrection, but believe it or not, resurrection is a key element in Uto-Aztecan religious theology. And I know that's surprising. Jump in anywhere, Chris.
Just following along here. Yeah. It's fascinating how all this sort of interconnects together. You know what I mean? There's similar themes really around the world with different religions too. So
yeah,
that's interesting. And we'll get back to the panel here in a minute, but all this leads up to, why this imagery is here and why it's saying what it's saying. So keep going.
So when you see a snake in the panel in the Cosos, and it's ubiquitous, I didn't think about it until Tirtha said, "You have any snakes in those panels?" And I said, "You know what? I don't ever see them. I know they might be there, but I didn't focus on those." And lo and behold, there's snakes all over the panels in Coso. Everywhere you look, there's snakes. And snakes are, I think I've talked about this before, but in Uto-Aztecan theology, snakes are immortal. Why were they immortal? Well, they're immortal because they shed their skin. And so they're reborn. They're reborn. They live again after their skins come back again. Additionally, they are elements, metaphors about life. Now, why in the world are the elements of life? And we've talked about this before. The snakes come out of their habitat, their holes in the ground, when it rains. So tell your story, Chris. I want to hear it again. And why is that? And give you the physical testament, the ground truth about this.
Well, as we've told before on this show, Little Petroglyph Canyon is on the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, U.S. Navy base. And that's where we were doing this big environmental survey for the Navy. It took us about 8-10 months to complete the whole thing, 500,000 acres. And we did this huge survey. And I'll tell you what, it didn't rain very often. I mean, it is the high desert, right? But when it did rain, everything came out, not just snakes, right? And they have the Mojave green rattlesnake, which is a very aggressive snake that will, slither towards you rather than away from you, and isn't afraid of anything, and it will come at you. And after a rain, I'll tell you what, because we wouldn't generally survey in the rain. It's generally hazardous just because of the ground and lightning and things like that. But we would come out immediately after, and not only do you get flowers springing up out of nowhere if it's the right time of year, but you've got all kinds of wildlife that have come out because the desert just turns green. And then also the snakes come out, partly because I think I read partly because of the holes that they would go into when it was not raining.
The burrows are flooded.
Water. Yeah, burrows are flooded, right? Because they don't make their own burrows. Yeah, they steal burrows.
And so psychologically, the Uto-Aztecans and Native Americans all over the world perceive this high correlation between snakes and rain.
Sure,
the snakes bring the rain. And rain to desert dwellers and in general is perceived as life. There's no life without rain. There's no life without water. And so the snakes are a symbol of life. Now, with those damn Uto-Aztecans, right? They had this ceremony, which I know is politically incorrect, but their religion amongst the Aztecs was heavy into human sacrifice. And this is accurate. We know it is from archaeological, where we found the skull racks in Mesoamerica, there in Mexico City, hundreds, thousands of them. And they would sacrifice men, women, and children. They'd walk up to the top of the pyramid. They'd put them on a rock, and they'd cut out their living hearts, and they'd take the hearts and as the beating hearts and offer them up to the sun, which was their god. And I know that's odd, and it's certainly not a very tasty way to religiously do things. But it is authentic and valid, and that's what happened. Now, how the heck does that relate back to this panel? Well, on this panel, the main figure is holding a snake, and it's a rattlesnake in her hand. And I know it's a rattlesnake because rattlesnakes have triangular heads. And the reason they have triangular heads is because the poison sacs that they can bite us with are actually in their heads and at the base of their heads, the crania. And so that's one of the key elements that keep showing up in these panels are snakes. Right. And the snake, and one of the things that Carolyn Boyd pointed out where these snakes appear in an unusual way. They're always shown as S-shaped figures. So they coil around and they look like S is the actual letter S. And so they're distinctive. And that means, that has a meaning to the Uto-Aztecans. It has a meaning that appears in their codices and also in their theology. And guess what it means? Rain. Rain and water. And so when you see these snakes and you see those S-shaped elements, as we do in this panel, it's having to do with rain. And rain is life. And when we have rain, we get the plants, we get the animals, and the people who are then sustainable and vital and are able to continue their life ways. And, it helps in every facet of existence. On that panel in Little Pet are clouds. The clouds are above the hands, which are upward trending when they're holding up the sky. And according to the theology of Uto-Aztecans, these clouds connect into a cloud serpent, and they bring the rain. So you've got the rain, you've got the clouds, you have the sun, which is below the major figure of the lunar goddess. And she's, again, holding a baton. Well, lo and behold, it's interesting. I guess scholarship is defined by one of my mentors as thinking long and hard and focusing and refocusing on the same subject, for enduring many years of research to help clarify certain key research questions or ask more pertinent research questions. So that's what I've done with the Coso material. And as I began to include others in it, I got more and more information.
Okay. Yeah. Let's take a break right there, and we will be back in a second to complete this discussion. If you're following along, or if you're not following along yet, go to the show notes and click the link to the show page, and you can download the PDF that has this image on it and a little bit of a description about it. So with that, we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to episode 166 of the Rock Art Podcast. And Alan, we kind of cut you off in the last segment there. Let's continue talking about some of the elements related to this panel and the overall big picture here. So keep it going.
Thank you. On these panels, usually there's a significant figure at the apex of the panel. And often, in one hand, they have snakes, S-shaped snakes. And in the other, at least in some extent, they have a wand. And I've seen that wand before, and it occurs and reoccurs in a number of panels throughout the Cosos. Back in 1968, when the famous book by Campbell Grant and his colleagues wrote about the Coso rock art, which sort of put it on the map with his book, he noticed this wand as well and referenced that it occurs and reoccurs in the same exact fashion in multiple panels. Okay?
Okay.
It's just a stick. It's a wand. It's like a cane or some sort of, a magic wand of some sort. Yeah.
Okay. Like, is it like a staff or something, or
like
shorter?
Like a staff. Yeah, like a staff.
Yeah. Okay.
But at the end of that staff is a tripartite or triangular end. So it either looks like there's 3 toes or a small triangle at the end of this staff. So fast forward to my discussions with a colleague. So I have cultivated a relationship with a guy by the name of Bernie Jones, Professor Bernard Jones, who taught at Cal State University, Fullerton. And he's an artist, and he creates imagery using pointillism and these detailed renditions of the rock art. And he's been publishing scholarly articles about rock art. He actually is trained to be a shaman at one point in his life and had connections with the Hopi. So when I showed him these staffs, these wands, he said, "That sounds pretty interesting." And he told me something that just blew my mind. He talked to one of the members of the Hopi, one of the ritualists, one of the headmen of that Indian group, who also practices the snake dance, which they do amongst the Hopi. And the snake dance, besides just being about snakes, and it is about snakes, but it's also about bringing the rain and bringing the harvest and bringing the bounty that those Hopi need to live for their agriculture and for their lives. But that baton, specifically, because the snake dance is correlated with the winter solstice. And why the heck would that be? Well, the winter solstice is an odd thing because the sun, which I didn't understand until relatively recently, does an interesting thing in the heavens. If you're looking at it, right, and wondering what it does, the sun travels. It changes its location throughout the year. And at the winter solstice, which means, I think, is it one of the shortest days of the year, Chris? The winter solstice?
The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I got that right.
December 20th, 21st, give or take.
Yeah, 21st, right. So I participated with Native people to see the winter solstice because there was an archaeoastronomical site within my research area. And I was told that the sun would come up and sit at the top of the largest peak in the far southern Sierra and just sit there. And I said, well, that would be interesting to see. So at 7:30 in the morning in the winter, I was, freezing my ass off there at 7:30, waiting for the sun to come up. And so lo and behold, it came up, right? It sits there at the top of the peak. Well, it sits there for several days around December 21st. and then continues in its journey in the heavens and goes back the way it came. It turns around and then moves the other direction. And this is part of the, cycle of life. Well,
Nice.
what does it have to do with that stick, Alan?
Yeah, exactly. They grabbing the sun with it?
The stick is a grabber of the sun to, in fact, make it move back and help it trajectory, push it back into its cycle. And it also is a way of balancing, out the day and the night and the good and the bad, and helping to equivocate all of life's crazy forces that we deal with on a daily basis, and to try to capture the cosmic energy to allow one to live and to thrive under the heavens. Isn't that amazing?
Okay. Yeah,
and
indeed.
It has that kind of association. Well, that would be perfectly understandable from a standpoint of looking at these figures and understanding the cosmic nature of creating the sun, and also having the lunar goddess diametrically opposed to the sun. And that is a key principle of the Uto-Aztecan cosmology. They see night and day as opposing forces, because it looks like the sun and the moon are fighting, because
Okay.
the sun is in the heavens, and it's a tough nut to handle because it burns up our people and burns up it gets hot.
Right.
And so it can get very hot, especially in the desert
Yeah.
or dry places. So it just sucks the life out of you. So there's the sun, which is a harsh and typically male force. But God forbid the sun goes away, and guess what? The moon comes up, and it's cool and it's night. And the light from the moon, helps us to see in the dark. Well, what do the Nahua think about that? Well, they think it's, cosmologically a story, that the sun is fighting with the moon. The sun comes up and travels through the heavens on the back of an eagle. And the moon comes up and is moving across the heavens on the back of a jaguar. And the spots of the jaguar, or the mountain lion jaguar of Mexico, have spots all over it, right? And those spots represent the stars in the heavens. And they fight for domination of the heavens.
Okay.
And every night and every morning, we can see that fight manifested, because we see it in the sky with the color red, which is the blood from the war between the sun and the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting story, huh?
Yeah, it really is.
So much to process.
It is. And it's one thing I really like is these elements are usual elements. I mean, you look at it like a writing language, right?
Yes,
you look at a book today.
It tells a story, right?
Yeah, for sure. But that's what I like about it, is you can identify these different elements, and we may not know some of the intent and the meaning behind the creation of an entire panel, right? But we can look at some of the individual elements and say, well, I've seen that over here and I've seen that over here, and then start to almost decode what they were doing. But that's why people are going away from calling this rock art too, because it's not art. It really is kind of a language, right? So that's what's interesting about it.
And the same thing goes for some of the imagery, which is rendered in the Catholic Church, because
or any religion, really.
Right. But in Catholicism, and also as it evolved from 2,000 years ago, most people were illiterate. They couldn't read. And so they had to somehow capture the themes and principles and stories in those beautiful windows, those colorful windows. And so the images that are on there relate back to the key figures and stories of the theology of the religion.
We do that too with other religions we don't have as much information about, because obviously Catholicism is a growing, thriving religion today. And we can look at these stained glass windows in different churches, especially like medieval cathedrals and things like that, and see how this has, some things have remained the same, some things have evolved, but you can see that. But we read on the archaeology show, we end up reading a lot of stories about Pompeii. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, Pompeii's imagery through their not only paintings on walls, but mosaics on floors and things like that, a lot of the same things. And some of it's religious, some of it's just political, but you can start pulling these elements out because they recorded different events and had different iconography based on certain situations or even certain rooms. And it's interesting how you can start reading that like a language.
And because it captures permanently, it's a memorial to the minds and culture and values of the people.
For sure.
And that's something that I don't know if everybody gets that so much. Because I know archaeologists sometimes belittle rock art because they say they can't deal with it or understand it. You can't date it. What good is it anyways? It's whatever it is. And we have a hard time dealing with that. Well, I think that rock art could be perceived as one of the most valuable material culture elements because it captures the imagery, the mind, the values, the ethics, the yearnings of the people over thousands of years.
Right. Indeed.
And I think that's a good place to stop.
I think so. All right. Well, if you've got any of your own interpretations or any comments on this panel, please send them through, comment on the podcast, or send them to the emails listed within the show notes. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll, like you said, we'll go ahead and cut it off right there. If all goes well, we have a pretty good interview coming up next week or next episode, and I'm looking forward to it. So I won't say any more just in case, because we were supposed to have somebody today and they couldn't make it. So we'll see how it shakes out with our producer. But yeah, we've got some good stuff coming up.
God bless you all. See you in the flip-flop.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.archpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. The Archaeology Podcast Network's chief editor is Rachel Roden. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy. Our social media and newsletter coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht. The APN was founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle on December 1st, 2014. We're supported by our amazing podcast hosts, many volunteers, and listeners like you. Check out membership at www.archpodnet.com/members.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.